Imagine you are a construction worker in 1998, renovating a quiet, historic townhouse at 36 Craven Street in London. You rip up a floorboard in the basement, expecting to find old pipes or dirt. Instead, your flashlight hits something white and smooth. You brush away the dust, and a human skull stares back at you. Then another, and another. By the time the police arrive, they've unearthed 1,200 pieces of bone from 15 different people. 6 of them were children. This wasn't the lair of a Victorian serial killer. This was the home of the most beloved man in American history, the double life of a diplomat. When we think of Ben Franklin, we think of the cuddly grandfather of the Revolution, the man with the bifocals who discovered electricity. But the official history is a polished mask. The real Franklin was a master of shadows. During the years leading up to the Revolution, Franklin lived in London as a colonial agent. On the surface, he was a philosopher and scientist. But behind the scenes, he was moving through the darkest circles of the British elite circles that would make a modern conspiracy theorist head spin. The Hellfire rituals, while he was supposed to be negotiating taxes and trade. Franklin was a frequent guest of Sir Francis Dashwood, the founder of the Hellfire Club. This wasn't just a group for elite gentlemen to have a drink. Their motto was Fay, C-E-Q. To voudrest do what thou wilt. They met in a series of man-made tunnels called the West Wickham Caves. Rumors at the time whispered of black masses, mock religious ceremonies where members dressed in monk robes and toasted to the devil. Why was the man who helped write the Declaration of Independence hanging out in caves with a cult? Historians argue he was networking, but the letters Franklin left behind suggest he enjoyed the chaos. He was a man who rejected traditional religion and preferred the company of those who dared to play with the forbidden. The basement of horrors, but let's go back to those bones in the basement. For decades, the discovery at 36 Craven Street was a dark cloud over Franklin's legacy. Was the first American a murderer? The truth is a different kind of dark. Franklin was a man of science at a time when science was illegal. In the 1700s, if you wanted to study human anatomy, you had to break the law. The church forbid the dissection of bodies, meaning doctors couldn't learn how to save lives without raw material. Franklin's close friend, William Hewson, was a pioneering anatomist. Together, they turned the basement of the London house into a secret laboratory. But where did the bodies come from? They came from the resurrection men, grave robbers who prowled London's cemeteries at midnight, digging up the freshly buried to sell to scientists. Franklin likely sat upstairs, sipping tea and writing letters about liberty, while just a few feet below his boots, his friend was sawing through human femurs and boiling skulls to study the nervous system. The children's bones found in the pit were likely the result of Hewson's study of birth defects. Franklin wasn't a killer, but he was a man who believed the pursuit of knowledge justified the desecration of the grave. The spy who loved Philadelphia Franklin's secrets weren't just in the basement. They were in his ink. He was the colony's first true spy master. He understood that the war for independence wouldn't just be won with muskets, but with rumors and deception. While in France, Franklin was constantly watched by British spies. His response? He gave them the show. He wore a rustic fur cap to play into the French fantasy of a simple man of the woods, all while secretly negotiating massive shipments of gunpowder and French gold. He used invisible ink to send messages, and even ran his own private printing press in a Paris suburb to pump out fake news. Stories propaganda designed to demoralize the British troops. He once printed a fake newspaper article, claiming the British were paying Native Americans for the scalps of colonists. A total lie that sent a wave of rage through Europe and turned the tide of public opinion. D'Alchemist's mind, Franklin was also obsessed with the idea of transmutation, not just of lead into gold, but of the human spirit. He was a high-ranking Freemason and a Grand Master of the Lodge in Pennsylvania. He believed in a religion of reason that the common public wasn't ready for. He once wrote a private essay titled Fart Proudly, a satirical piece sent to the Royal Academy of Brussels, arguing that scientists should find a way to make human gas smell like perfume. While it sounds like a joke, it revealed his true philosophy, that there was no limit to what man could control: nature, the body, and even the stink of humanity. The legacy of the shadowed when Benjamin Franklin died. He was the most famous man in the world. But as the dirt settled on his coffin, his family and friends began the quiet work of cleaning up his image. They edited his autobiography to make him seem more pious. They burned letters that mentioned his wild nights in London and his associations with radicals. They wanted to turn the man into a statue, but the statues don't tell you about the bones under the floorboards. They don't tell you about the secret caves or the midnight grave robbers. The real Benjamin Franklin was a man who lived in the tension between the light of the Enlightenment and the darkness of the human condition. He knew that to build a new world, you had to be willing to get your hands dirty sometimes. Literally, with the dust of the dead. With the precision of a scientist, Jefferson took 4 versions of the New Testament in Greek, Latin, French, and English, and began his editing. The virgin birth, slice, gone, turning water into wine. Slice, removed, the loaves, and the fishes, slice, deleted. The resurrection, this was the ultimate cut. In Jefferson's version of the story, the book doesn't end with an empty tomb and an ascended savior. It ends with a heavy stone being rolled in front of the cave and Jesus staying inside. To Jefferson, the miracles were just diamonds in a dunghill, and he was the only one smart enough to clean them off. Picture this. 2 of America's founding fathers, once the closest of friends, become bitter political rivals. Then, in a twist of fate that seems almost unbelievable, they both die on the exact same day, and not just any day, the 50th anniversary of the very nation they helped create. This isn't a Hollywood script. It's the incredible true story of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Let's rewind to the beginning. Before they were presidents, Adams and Jefferson were comrades in the fight for American independence. Imagine them in the summer of 1776, huddled together in Philadelphia. Adams, the fiery lawyer from Massachusetts, and Jefferson, the thoughtful Virginian intellectual. They were a powerful duo on the committee, tasked with drafting the Declaration of Independence. Adams, recognizing Jefferson as superior writing talent, what he called his masterly pen, insisted that Jefferson write the first draft. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision for a new country. After the Revolution, their friendship deepened while serving as diplomats in Europe. Adams was in London, Jefferson in Paris. They toured English gardens together, exchanged ideas, and their families grew close. They were, by all accounts, the best of friends, united in their revolutionary cause. But politics has a way of changing things. Like in America, the new nation was figuring itself out, and deep ideological divides began to form. This is where our story takes a turn. The first two political parties emerged: the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Adams and the Federalists believed in a strong central government, a national bank, and a powerful executive. Jefferson and his party championed states' rights, an agrarian society, and feared that a strong federal government would become a new form of monarchy. Their philosophical differences became personal. When Adams became the second president in 1797, Jefferson was his vice president. Think about that for a second, the two leaders of opposing parties forced to work together. The political climate was toxic. Newspapers, funded by each party, launched vicious attacks. Adams was called a monarchist, a tyrant. Jefferson was accused of being a radical atheist who wanted to bring French-style revolution and chaos to America. The friendship that had been forged in revolution was now shattered by politics. They stopped speaking. For over a decade, two of the nation's greatest minds were estranged, their correspondence silent. The election of 1800 was one of the most brutal in American history. It pitted the incumbent President Adams against his Vice President Jefferson. In the end, Jefferson won, and Adams was so embittered that he left Washington, D.C. on the morning of Jefferson's inauguration, refusing to attend the ceremony. The rift seemed permanent, but time has a way of healing wounds. As they grew older and retired from the political battlefield, a mutual friend, Dr. Benjamin Rush, another signer of the Declaration, decided to intervene. He couldn't stand the thought of these two giants going to their graves as enemies. He wrote to both men, urging them to rekindle their friendship. On New Year's Day, 1812, John Adams took the first step. He sent a short, cordial note to Jefferson at his home Monticello. Jefferson responded with warmth and enthusiasm, and so began one of the most remarkable correspondences in American history. For the next 14 years, they exchanged over 150 letters. They wrote about everything: philosophy, religion, history, their regrets, their hopes for the country they had built. They debated, they reminisced, they found common ground. Their rivalry had melted away, replaced by the profound respect and affection they had once shared. They were friends again. Adams wrote from his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts, while Jefferson wrote from Monticello in Virginia. Through their letters, they were able to look back on their lives and their roles in the creation of the United States, not as political combatants, but as fellow patriots. They were the last two surviving signers of the Declaration of Independence, a living link to the nation's birth. Now, we come to the final, almost mythical chapter of their story. The year is 1826. The United States is preparing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Jubilee of Freedom. Both Adams and Jefferson are now in their 90s, frail and in failing health. All across the country, people were planning massive celebrations for the 4th of July. In Virginia, Jefferson's health was rapidly declining. He had been bedridden for weeks, yet he held on, determined to see one last sunrise on the anniversary of his greatest achievement. His doctor, Robley Dungleson, sat by his bedside. On the evening of July 3rd, Jefferson drifted in and out of consciousness. He woke up briefly and asked, "Is it the 4th?" "Not yet," the doctor replied. Those would be among his last words. Thomas Jefferson passed away shortly after noon on July 4th, 1826, hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts. John Adams was also on his deathbed. He, too, had held on, seemingly waiting for this historic day. He had been slipping in and out of consciousness in one of his final lucid moments. Unaware that his old friend and rival had already passed away just hours earlier, he whispered his last words. Thomas Jefferson survives. John Adams died late in the afternoon on July 4th, 1826. Two founding fathers, two presidents, friends, then rivals, then friends again. Both died on the same day, the 50th anniversary of the document that bound their destinies together. When the news spread across the nation, a process that took days and weeks back, then Americans were stunned. It seemed too incredible to be a coincidence. Many saw it as a sign of divine providence, a final, poetic seal on the American experiment. The deaths of Adams and Jefferson on the nation's 50th birthday transformed them from mere historical figures into American legends. Their story became a powerful symbol of national unity, a reminder that even in the face of deep political division, the bonds of patriotism and shared ideals could endure. It's a story that reminds us that our heroes were human. They had flaws, they had disagreements, they made mistakes, but in the end, their love for their country and their respect for each other transcended their differences. The lives, the rivalry, and the astonishingly timed deaths of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are not just a footnote in history. They are a timeless American epic. We have all seen the face. It's on the dollar bill, the quarter, and massive oil paintings in every government building in the world. George Washington, the man who could not tell a lie, the general who crossed the Delaware, the stoic father of his country. But if you look closely at those portraits, you'll notice something strange about his mouth. His lips are always pressed together in a tight, awkward line, as if he's struggling to keep a secret from escaping. And it was. Because behind that famous stoic expression was a mouthful of rot, lead, and a secret so chilling. It reframes the entire American myth. Forget the wooden teeth. Truth is much, much darker. The myth of the cherry tree, the story of the wooden teeth, is perhaps the greatest fake news campaign in history. It was designed to make Washington seem humble, rustic, and simple. But George Washington was anything but simple. He was an aristocrat, a land speculator, and a man obsessed with his physiognomy, the way his physical appearance projected power. By the time he became president, the man who led the Continental Army to victory had only one single natural tooth left in his head. The rest had been lost to a combination of poor 18th century hygiene, mercury-based medicines for smallpox, and the sheer stress of the war. For a man who lived to be the alpha of the new world, this was a humiliating weakness. He couldn't speak clearly, he couldn't eat in public, and his face was beginning to collapse inward. He needed a solution, and he was willing to pay any price to get it. The living dentures, Washington's dentures, were a marvel of 18th century Frankenstein engineering. They weren't made of wood. They were crafted from a horrifying cocktail of materials: hippo ivory, elephant bone, gold wire, lead, and human teeth. Think about that for a second. To make these dentures work, the dentist had to carve a base out of animal bone and then drill holes into it to transplant real teeth from other human beings. The ivory stained easily and absorbed odors, meaning Washington was in constant, agonizing pain and smelled of rotting bone. But the most haunting question is, where did the human teeth come from? In the 1700s, there was a tooth market. Poor people would often sell their front teeth for a few shillings to survive. But George Washington's own account books from May 1784 reveal a transaction that history books tried to hide for centuries. The ledger shows that he paid several enslaved people at Mount Vernon for 9 of their teeth. The man who was fighting for the inalienable rights of man was literally wearing the teeth of those he held in bondage. This wasn't just a dental procedure. It was a physical manifestation of the great American contradiction. The General of Liberty was speaking through the teeth of the oppressed. The General's silent command Washington was a man of immense self-control. He knew that if the public saw him as a toothless, stumbling old man, the fragile new Union would collapse. He treated his image like a military operation. He rarely spoke in public because the springs in his dentures were so tight that if he relaxed his jaw, his mouth would literally pop open. Imagine the mental strength required to lead a nation to negotiate with kings, and to command an army, all while your own mouth is a ticking time bomb of lead and bone. This secret pain fueled his reputation for being silent and stoic. He wasn't being mysterious, he was holding his face together. He was a man trapped inside a mask of his own making, a prisoner of the very image he had created to save the country. The shadow of Mount Vernon, Washington's secrets went beyond his mouth. At Mount Vernon, he ran a massive intelligence network. Even after the war, he stayed connected. He was the Grand Master of his Masonic Lodge, and he filled his home with symbols of the great architect. But as he approached the end of his life, a strange shadow fell over him. He became obsessed with his own death. He left meticulous instructions that he was not to be buried for at least 3 days. Why? Because he had a paralyzing fear of being buried alive. He had seen enough miracles and strange occurrences in the war to believe that the line between life and death was thinner than we think. The final apotheosis when Washington finally died in 1799. The nation didn't just mourn a president, they tried to deify him. There were actually serious plans to build a tomb for Washington inside the US Capitol, directly under the center of the rotunda. The idea was to create a sacred center for the nation, where the spirit of the founder could be consulted, much like the ancient Greeks consulted oracles. The tomb was built, and you can still see the empty crypt today. But Washington's family refused to move his body from Mount Vernon. They knew that Washington, the man who refused to be king, shouldn't be turned into a god in a temple. They wanted him to rest in the soil he had fought for. So, why does any of this matter? Why do we care about Franklin's bones, Jefferson's razor, or Washington's teeth? Because the founding fathers were not the cardboard cutouts we were taught about in school. They weren't perfect saints, and they weren't one-dimensional villains. They were alchemists. They took a world of chaos, blood, and old-world tyranny and tried to transmute it into something new. They used every tool at their disposal: science, secrecy, occult symbolism, and even deception to build a machine called America. They knew that to build something that would last centuries, they had to plant seeds in the shadows where no one would look. They left us a map written in the streets of DC, a message printed on our money, and a warning hidden in their private letters. They were men who looked into the abyss and decided to build a bridge across it. They were flawed, they were brilliant, and they were terrifying. We live in the world they dreamt up in their secret meetings and midnight laboratories. The real American dream is what you see in the light of day. That's the engine that has been humming in the dark for 250 years. The question isn't what were their secrets. The real question is, are we brave enough to handle the truth they left behind? The next time you look at a dollar bill, don't just see a piece of paper. Look at the eye. Look at the pyramid. And remember, the men who put them there are still watching, waiting to see if their great work will finally be finished.